It was one of those bone-chilling winter nights when your breath turns to fog and car windows frost over within minutes. The kind of night when all anyone wants is to be home, wrapped in a warm blanket with a hot drink in hand. For the Martinez family, their cozy evening was still a half-hour drive away as they headed back from what had been a beautiful celebration of their grandmother's 70th birthday. The family car hummed quietly along the empty suburban streets, carrying precious cargo. Dozens of happy memories from the party, leftovers from Abuela's famous tamales packed carefully in foil, and their sleeping 6-year-old daughter nestled in her car seat. Still clutching the little party favor bag she'd refused to let go. The radio played softly, some old love song that made Alina smile and reach for her husband's hand across the center console. Miguel Martinez was the kind of driver who always followed the rules, a habit from his 15 years as a high school teacher. He believed in setting a good example, whether in the classroom or on the road. His students often joked about seeing him waiting at a red light at 11 p.m. when there wasn't another car in sight. Tonight, he was being extra careful, knowing how black ice could form on these roads without warning. The clock on the dashboard read 10:45 p.m. when the first flash of red and blue lights lit up their rearview mirror. Elena noticed it first, her happy humming cutting off mid-note. "Mi amor," she said softly, touching Miguel's arm. His eyes flicked up to the mirror, confusion crossing his face as he signaled and carefully pulled over to the side of the road. Their little girl stirred in her car seat, the flashing lights painting her peaceful face in alternating colors. Elena turned in her seat, instinctively reaching back to rest a reassuring hand on her daughter's knee. The warmth of the car's heater suddenly felt insufficient against the creeping cold of uncertainty. Miguel did everything by the book, just like he taught his students in their mock driving safety lessons. Hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, interior light turned on, registration and insurance already pulled from the glove compartment before the officers even approached. He even cracked the window slightly, despite the bitter cold, to make it clear he had nothing to hide. Through the side mirror, they watched 2 officers approach, their boots crunching on the frozen gravel of the roadside. The sound seemed unusually loud in the quiet night, like footsteps in an empty hallway. Elena squeezed Miguel's hand one last time before folding her own in her lap, trying to project calm even as her heart picked up speed. Neither of them could have known that this routine traffic stop was about to turn their ordinary winter night into something that would change not just their lives, but their entire community. The next few minutes would test their dignity, their rights, and ultimately their faith in justice. But for now, they sat waiting, the engine idling, warm air still flowing from the vents as the officers' flashlight beams swept across their license plate and into their windows. The night stretched out before them, dark and uncertain, while overhead, the stars continued their cold, distant watching. Witnesses to what was about to unfold on this frozen patch of suburban roadway. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives come not with a bang, but with a simple flash of police lights on an ordinary winter evening. The first sign that something was wrong came in the harsh beam of the flashlight, unnecessarily bright as it swept across their faces. The older officer rapped on the window with his knuckles, despite it already being rolled down. The sound made their daughter stir in her sleep, her little forehead creasing with worry even in her dreams. "License and registration," the officer demanded, not even bothering with the customary greeting. Miguel handed over the documents he already prepared, his hands steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. The officer barely glanced at them before speaking again. "Step out of the vehicle." Alina's breath caught in her throat. Outside, the temperature display on their car showed 20 degrees. "Officer," she said softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Our daughter is sleeping, and it's freezing." "I said everyone out of the vehicle," the second officer cut in, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "That means everyone." Miguel exchanged a quick glance with Alina, years of marriage allowing them to communicate volumes in that single look. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, deliberately, the way he always taught his students to move during any police encounter. "May I ask what seems to be the problem, officer?" "Your taillights out," came the curt response. Though both Miguel and Elena knew for certain they'd checked all their lights just that morning. A Saturday ritual Miguel never skipped. But there was no point arguing, not with their daughter in the car, not with the temperature dropping by the minute. Elena gently woke their little girl, whispering soothing words as the child's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened by the strange lights and stern voices. "Mommy, I'm cold," she whispered as Elena lifted her from the car seat. Elena wrapped her own coat around her daughter, leaving herself to face the bitter wind in just her party dress. The family stood shivering by the roadside while the officers circled their car like wolves around prey. Other vehicles drove past slowly, their headlights illuminating the scene like unwanted spotlights. Each passing car felt like another witness to their humiliation, another set of eyes watching them stand in the cold without explanation or cause. "Spread your legs, hands on the hood," the older officer ordered Miguel. Elena held their daughter tighter, turning her face away as her husband, the same man who'd spent that afternoon leading his mother-in-law in a birthday dance, was patted down like a common criminal. The cold metal of the hood leached warmth from Miguel's hands, but his voice remained steady as he asked again about the reason for their treatment. Their little girl started crying quietly, the kind of crying children do when they're trying to be brave, but don't understand what's happening. Each tear froze almost instantly on her cheeks. Elena tried to shield her from the wind, but there was no protection from the words being thrown around by the officers. Words about your kind, and teaching lessons that had no place in any professional police encounter. 45 minutes ticked by like ice ages. The officers took their time searching the car, pulling out the birthday gifts and leftover food, leaving them strewn across the seats. They rifled through Elena's purse, dumped out their daughter's backpack full of coloring books and crayons, and questioned every receipt and document in the glove compartment. All the while, the family stood watching, their feet growing numb on the frozen ground. Elena had started praying quietly in Spanish, a habit from her grandmother that surfaced in times of stress. Their daughter had stopped crying, but her silence was somehow worse. A child's first lesson in how the world can turn cold in more ways than one. The night air carried the sound of more approaching cars, more witnesses to their roadside detention. But among those passing headlights, someone slowed down more than the others. Someone noticed. Someone cared. And in that moment, though the Martinez family didn't know it yet, the wheels of justice had begun to turn. The humiliation came in waves, each one colder than the winter air around them. Standing there under the glare of police lights, the Martinez family felt their dignity being stripped away layer by layer, like the warmth leaving their bodies in the freezing night. "Look at all this," one officer announced loudly, pulling out the carefully wrapped birthday presents from the trunk. "Where'd you get these from?" The accusation in his voice was clear, as if a family couldn't possibly have legitimate reasons for carrying gifts. Elena's hands trembled, but not from the cold, as she watched him carelessly toss aside the hand-knitted blanket her mother had spent months making. Their little girl had buried her face in her mother's neck, but her ears couldn't escape the officer's comments. "These people," they kept saying, as if the Martinez family weren't standing right there, as if they weren't human enough to warrant basic respect. Each "these people" felt like a slap, each dismissive gesture a reminder that in some people's eyes, their very existence was suspicious. More cars slowed down to watch the scene, their headlights creating an unwanted spotlight. Some drivers pulled out their phones, recording what they saw. Elena noticed a woman in a blue sedan who stopped completely, her face visible in her car's interior light as she held up her phone. In that stranger's concerned expression, Elena saw the first hint that maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone in recognizing the wrongness of this situation. Miguel stood perfectly still, his teacher's instincts kicking in even now, showing his students by example how to stay dignified under pressure, though none of them were here to see it. "Officer," he tried again, his voice hoarse from the cold. "We're just heading home from my mother-in-law's birthday party. Everything in the car belongs to us. Please, can we at least get our daughter back in the warm car?" The response was a rough laugh. "Sure, everyone's just heading home at this hour. And I suppose you have receipts for all these items." The officer held up the birthday cards, reading them mockingly aloud, making fun of the Spanish endearments written inside. Each word he twisted felt like another small violation, turning their family's love into something to be ridiculed. Time seemed to move differently in the cold. Every minute stretched out like an hour as they watched the officers methodically dismantle their evening. The careful organization of their trunk, the neat stack of graded papers in Miguel's briefcase, even the emergency kit he always kept spotlessly arranged. All of it was scattered across the roadside like worthless trash. A small crowd had gathered now, keeping their distance but watching. Some whispered among themselves, others held up phones, recording. The officers seemed to notice, too, their actions becoming slightly less aggressive, but their words growing more cutting, more personal. They found Alina's family photos in her wallet and made snide comments about her relatives. They discovered Miguel's teaching awards in his briefcase and questioned whether they were real. Their daughter, who had been so proud earlier that evening when she helped her grandmother blow out the birthday candles, now stood trembling in her party dress, despite being wrapped in both her parents' coats. She watched with wide eyes as one officer roughly flipped through her favorite coloring book, the one her grandmother had given her that very night, letting pages tear. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 45 minutes, the older officer approached with a ticket book. "Your taillight's out," he declared again, writing up a citation with deliberate slowness. "And your registration's expired." Miguel knew both claims were false. He'd renewed the registration last month, and they'd checked all the lights that morning. But he stayed silent, understanding that this moment wasn't about truth or justice. As they were finally allowed to return to their car, they found their belongings strewn across the seats, the carefully packed leftovers spilled, the birthday gifts torn and crumpled. But worse than the physical mess was the invisible damage. The look in their daughter's eyes, the tremble in Alina's hands, the tight set of Miguel's jaw. Some things, once broken, take more than just time to repair. Sometimes the smallest decisions make the biggest differences. For Alina Martinez, it was the split-second choice to press the record button on her phone when the officers first approached their car. She'd slipped the phone into her coat pocket, its microphone capturing every word, every cruel laugh, every dismissive comment that followed. Back home that night, no one could sleep. Their daughter, usually so independent about bedtime, asked to sleep in their room. As she finally drifted off between her parents, Alina pulled out her phone and played the recording. Her hands shook as the voices filled their darkened bedroom. Harsh official tones cutting through the quiet night air once again. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, Alina noticed several missed calls. Word had spread through social media overnight. That woman in the blue sit-in. She hadn't just recorded the incident. She'd posted it online. The video showed everything. The Martinez family shivering in the cold, the officers' aggressive searching, their daughter crying, the scattered birthday presents. By morning, it had thousands of views and shares. Their neighbor, a kind-hearted woman who worked as a legal assistant, came over with coffee and determination. She brought printouts of similar incidents, contact information for civil rights organizations, and most importantly, hope. "What happened to you wasn't right," she said, squeezing Elena's hand. "And you have proof. You have witnesses. You have a voice." The local news picked up the story by midday. Reporters gathered outside their house, but instead of feeling invaded, the Martinez family felt seen, truly seen, for the first time since that terrible night. Other families began coming forward with similar stories about the same officers. What had felt like an isolated incident of humiliation was becoming something bigger, something that might actually lead to change. Miguel spent hours that afternoon carefully documenting everything while it was still fresh in his memory. He wrote down every detail, the exact words used, the time spent in the cold, the damage to their belongings. His teacher's dedication to accuracy served him well as he created a timeline of events, marking each escalation, each unnecessary action, each moment their rights were ignored. Their daughter sat at her little desk nearby, coloring quietly, but refusing to use the torn coloring book from her grandmother. Instead, she drew picture after picture of their family, standing in the cold, but always together. These crayon drawings, simple but powerful, would later become symbols of innocence confronted with injustice. Support poured in from unexpected places. Miguel's students, past and present, started an online petition. The local teachers' union offered their backing. Community leaders reached out, offering resources and assistance. Even some retired police officers contacted them, expressing shame at how their profession had been represented. But it was Elena's phone recording that proved most powerful. Unlike the bystander videos taken from a distance, her recording captured every word clearly, the sneering tones, the casual cruelty, the underlying prejudice in every interaction. Combined with the dash cam footage they would later obtain through legal channels, it painted an undeniable picture of abuse of power. That evening, as the family sat down to dinner, their home phone rang again. This time, it was a respected civil rights attorney who had seen the video and heard the recording. She didn't make grand promises or speak of revenge. Instead, she talked about justice, about changing systems, about making sure other families wouldn't have to go through the same ordeal. As Miguel looked around their dinner table, at his wife's tired but determined face, at his daughter carefully arranging her peas into a happy face like she always did, he realized something important. They weren't just documenting an incident anymore. They were building a case for change, gathering evidence not just for themselves, but for every family who had ever been made to feel less than human by those sworn to protect them. The documentation of that freezing night was becoming a warm flame of hope, spreading light into dark corners where abuse of power had too long gone unchecked. Truth has a way of demanding to be heard. As the video of that winter night spread across social media, it landed on the desk of the Internal Affairs Department. The footage wasn't just shocking. It was impossible to ignore. The sight of a family shivering in the cold, a little girl crying while wrapped in her mother's coat, had struck a chord with everyone who saw it. The investigation started quietly at first. A detective from Internal Affairs visited the Martinez home on a sunny morning, her notebook ready, but her manner gentle. She listened as they replayed Alina's phone recording, her pen moving steadily across the page, catching every detail. When their daughter came home from school during the interview, the detective paused to smile and compliment her drawings. Simple pictures that told a powerful story of that night. But this wasn't just about one incident. As investigators dug deeper, they found a pattern. Other families had similar stories about these same officers. A grandfather who'd been made to stand in the rain. A pregnant woman forced to wait outside her car during a traffic stop. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, revealing a clear picture of repeated misconduct. The police department's own records told an interesting story. The two officers had a history. Dozens of complaints filed over the years, all quietly dismissed or buried in paperwork. Now, with public attention focused on the case, these old complaints surfaced like bubbles rising to the top of troubled waters. The dash cam footage from the police car that night proved especially damaging. While the officers hadn't bothered to turn on their body cameras, a violation of department policy, the dash cam had captured everything. The clear view of the Martinez's working taillight, the unnecessary searches, the scattered birthday presents. Most importantly, it recorded the officers' conversations when they thought no one could hear them, revealing prejudices they tried to hide behind badges. Community meetings sprang up across town. People gathered in church basements and community centers, sharing their own experiences. The Martinez family attended these meetings not to be the center of attention, but to listen and support others. Their daughter would sit quietly beside them, coloring in a new book given to her by a kind stranger, while adults around her worked to change the world she would grow up in. The investigation spread beyond just these two officers. Questions were asked about training procedures, about oversight, about why so many previous complaints had been ignored. The police chief, facing mounting pressure, ordered a complete review of department policies. Internal affairs investigators worked overtime, reviewing years of traffic stop data, body camera footage, and civilian complaints. Local reporters dug into the story too. They found that these officers had a pattern of targeting certain neighborhoods, certain types of families. The data painted a clear picture, one that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or misunderstanding. Statistical analysis showed that some drivers were far more likely to be pulled over, searched, and humiliated than others. The officers' own records started speaking too. Their dash cam videos from other stops showed similar patterns of behavior. Their departmental emails revealed concerning language. Their social media history, when examined, showed posts that contradicted their claims of unbiased policing. As weeks passed, the investigation grew larger than anyone had expected. It wasn't just about two officers anymore. It was about systems that had allowed their behavior to continue unchecked for years. It was about policies that needed changing, training that needed updating, and oversight that needed strengthening. Through it all, the Martinez family remained strong. They attended every meeting, answered every question, and shared their story whenever asked. Their courage inspired others to come forward, turning their single voice into a chorus calling for change. Their little girl watched it all, understanding in her own way that something important was happening, that sometimes standing in the cold can lead to warmth for others down the road. The investigation was revealing more than just facts and figures. It was showing how a single winter night could spark a movement for change, how one family's humiliation could lead to dignity for countless others. Change often starts small, like a pebble dropped in still water. The ripples from that cold winter night were now spreading through the entire police department, touching every corner of the community. The police chief stood before the city council, cameras flashing, as he announced a complete overhaul of department policies. But real change isn't just about big announcements. It's about the small, everyday differences that add up to something meaningful. In police briefing rooms across the city, officers now watched the dash cam footage from the Martinez family incident as part of their new training. They saw how quickly a routine stop could turn into something ugly, how easily power could be abused, how deeply words could wound. The reforms came in waves. First, the immediate changes: mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off during stops, regular reviews of officer conduct, and clear consequences for violations. No more mysterious technical difficulties, no more conveniently missing footage, no more brushing complaints under the rug. Then came the deeper changes. The department brought in experts to conduct sensitivity training, not just one-time sessions, but ongoing programs that became part of the job. Officers learned about implicit bias, about the importance of treating every person with dignity, about the lasting impact their actions could have on families and communities. The Martinez family's case had opened eyes and hearts. In community meetings, veteran officers shared stories about times they'd done things right, how taking an extra moment to explain, showing basic courtesy, or simply treating people with respect had made all the difference. These positive examples became part of the new training materials. Local schools got involved too. Miguel's students started a program where young people could meet with police officers in neutral settings, not as authority figures, but as community members. They shared snacks, played basketball, and most importantly, talked. Real conversations happened, barriers began to break down, and understanding grew on both sides. The new Civilian Oversight Committee wasn't just for show. They had real power to review complaints, recommend changes, and hold officers accountable. Community members, legal experts, and retired officers worked together, bringing different perspectives to each case they reviewed. Their meetings were open to the public, their findings transparent. Technology played its part too. New apps let people rate their interactions with police officers, providing immediate feedback. Dashboard cameras now uploaded footage automatically to secure servers. Regular audits ensured that every stop was properly documented and reviewed. But perhaps the most significant change was in attitude. Officers who had initially resisted the reforms began to see the benefits. Traffic stops became less tense. Community trust grew slowly but steadily. Officers reported feeling more satisfied with their work when they focused on genuine public service rather than intimidation. The department's new motto, suggested by a rookie officer who'd been inspired by the changes, read simply, "Protect with respect." It wasn't just words on patrol cars. It became a genuine philosophy that guided every interaction. Officers were now evaluated not just on their arrest records, but on their community engagement and positive interactions. One warm spring afternoon, the Martinez family was invited to speak at the police academy graduation ceremony. Their daughter, now a bit taller and more confident, stood beside them as Miguel shared their story. But this time, it wasn't just about that cold night. It was about what had grown from it. How pain had led to progress, how humiliation had sparked hope. Looking out at the fresh faces of new officers, Elena saw something that moved her deeply, genuine understanding in their eyes. These weren't the same kind of officers who had tormented her family that winter night. These were people who had learned from that incident, who were entering their careers with a different perspective, a different heart. As the graduates received their badges, each one passed by the Martinez family, offering not just handshakes but sincere words of gratitude. Their story had become part of the foundation these new officers would build their careers upon, a reminder that the badge they wore was not a license for power, but a symbol of public trust. 1 year after that freezing winter night, the Martinez family sat in a warm courtroom, listening as the final decision was read. The 2 officers had been terminated from the force months ago, but today made it official. They would never wear a badge in any department again. More importantly, their case had become a catalyst for lasting change. The settlement money wasn't what mattered most to the Martinez family, though it was substantial. What truly mattered was what they did with it. That afternoon, standing on the courthouse steps, they'd announced the creation of the Community Trust Foundation, an organization dedicated to building bridges between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Their daughter, who had been so frightened at cold night, now stood tall beside her parents. She had turned 7, and her birthday party the week before had been something special. Among the guests were several police officers, not there to intimidate, but to celebrate. They'd brought her a junior police badge, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder that things could change for the better. The foundation's first project was simple but powerful. They created a scholarship program for local students interested in law enforcement careers, especially those who wanted to serve their own communities. The selection committee included both community members and police officers, working together to choose candidates who showed not just aptitude, but genuine compassion and understanding. Local schools began inviting police officers to join their career days, but with a different approach. Instead of just showing off equipment and talking about catching bad guys, they shared real stories about community service, about making a positive difference, about treating everyone with dignity and respect. Miguel's students were often the most engaged, asking thoughtful questions about accountability and trust. The dash cam video from that winter night became a teaching tool, but not just for police academies. It was shown in community centers, schools, and training programs across the country. Not to spread anger or fear, but to demonstrate how quickly things could go wrong, and more importantly, how they could be done right. Alina found herself speaking at conferences, sharing their story with a quiet strength that moved audiences more than any shouting could. She talked about the cold that had seeped into their bones that night, but also about the warmth of community support that followed. She spoke about fear turning to hope, about hurt transforming into healing. The officers who had wronged them, They too became part of the larger story of change. Their actions had exposed problems that needed fixing. Their mistakes had led to solutions that made everyone safer. Without excusing what they'd done, the Martinez family chose to focus on the positive changes their misconduct had sparked. Their local police department became a model for others across the country. Other cities sent representatives to learn about their reforms, their training programs, their community engagement initiatives. The changes that had started with one family's humiliation were now helping thousands of others avoid similar experiences. One evening, exactly 1 year after that terrible night, the Martinez family drove past the spot where they had been stopped. Their daughter noticed it first. "Look," she said, pointing out the window. There, where they had once stood shivering in the cold, was now a new police substation, one built with community input, designed to be welcoming and transparent, literally and figuratively. Inside their car, warm and safe, they didn't feel fear anymore when they saw police lights. Their daughter no longer hid her face when officers passed by. Instead, she often waved, and they waved back. A simple gesture that spoke volumes about how things had changed. The Martinez family's story didn't end with justice being served. It became something bigger, a reminder that positive change is possible, that one family's courage can ripple out to touch countless lives, that even the coldest night can lead to a warmer tomorrow. Their experience had become a beacon of hope, showing that when communities stand together, when people choose dignity over vengeance, real change isn't just possible, it's inevitable.